Ambassador Sudhir Devare, fellow panelists, distinguished delegates, members of the faculty and my student friends. May I at the outset express my deep sense of appreciation to the organizers of this conference, especially to Ambassador Devare for facilitating my visit from Chennai to this place, which will enable me to share some of my thoughts with you. The problem we generally face in academic is the time constraint of 15 minutes. My classes generally is for 1.5 hours, and for me to warm up itself will take about 20 minutes. But I shall try to be as brief as possible. The Hollywood actress Elizabeth Taylor told her husband soon after her 9th marriage, "This too shall be brief." Ambassador Devare rightly pointed out that the objective of our relations with countries, littoral states of the Indian Ocean, is based on the benign interaction of the past and the mutuality of interests that link us at present. Keeping these twin facets in mind, I shall start my presentation by giving to you two visuals, on the basis of which I'll start my presentation. The first visual is in Indonesia, the largest Muslim country in the world, in Jakarta, in Merdeka Square. Merdeka in Bahasa Indonesia means Independence Square. The beautiful marble representation of Gitopadesha, where Krishna drives the chariot, Arjuna sitting behind. We do not have such a representation in India, but in Indonesia, the largest Muslim country in the world, they take pride in their culture, and therefore this represents. This was constructed, I was discussing it, Hema Devare and Valdas Ghoshal, during the later phase of Sukarno's rule, late 1950s. And he was one of those who was proud of the culture of his people. And his name itself, his father changed his name from Kusno to Karno, based upon the Mahabharata hero Karna. And the syncretic culture which Indonesia developed, to which I'll make a common reference, is represented a Muslim country having such a great monument. In fact, the students may not know, the first Republic Day that we had in January 1950, the head of state who visited India was Sukarno and his wife Padmavati. From Delhi, they went to Karachi, then capital of Pakistan, and the Pakistani media could not reconcile to the fact that a Muslim lady can have a Hindu name. So one of the Pakistani newspapers had the headline, "Sukarno with his wife Fatima is arriving tomorrow." They changed Padmavati into Fatima so that it becomes a Muslim name. How is it that Indonesia combines the past with the present in terms of civilization? In order to understand this, appreciate it properly, you must remember the syncretic character of the Indonesian civilization. The first religion which prevailed in Indonesia was animism, where the forces of nature were deified. Then came Hinduism in all its forms, Shaivism, Vaishnavism, the combination of both the Harihara cult. The Hinduism did not replace animism, it blended with animism. Over that came Buddhism, the Theravada form of Buddhism, and the Mahayana form of the Buddhism. That also synthesized with the earlier beliefs. And then came Islam. Islam was brought to Indonesia by the Gujarati merchants. And in that process, it had already been, a lot of accretions had taken place in the form of mysticism. And Islam also did not replace the earlier religion. So what took place was a synthesis of various forms depending upon the creative genius of the people. One of the first books that I read on Indonesia when I started my research in Southeast Asian studies was Louis Fisher's book, The Story of Indonesia, where he mentions that Rama went to Mecca and came back as Muhammad. This had been their tradition. In fact, Asghar Ali Engineer, the well-known Muslim scholar, used to visit Indonesia regularly. He went to Gadjah Mada University, and 2 girl students of the university received him and took him to the university. On the way, he asked them, "What is your name?" They said, one said that my name is Lakshmi, and the other said, my name is Sita. Muslims having Lakshmi and Sita as the name. And then they told Asghar Ali Engineer, to his surprise, when a girl becomes pregnant, they gift her with a coconut, on one face of which is a picture of Rama, and another place is a picture of Sita. That if a boy is born, the boy should be like Rama, and the girl should be like Sita. This is the syncretic tradition of Indonesia. That is why they take pride in the fact they have Gita-padesha in the heart. And the first international Ramayana festival was not held in India. It was held in Indonesia, and only the second one that we organized. The second visual that I wanted to present to you is from Cambodia. The largest Hindu temple in the world is not in India. It is in Cambodia, in Angkor Wat, where you have the Sagar Manthan, about which Professor Majumdar yesterday mentioned. On one side are the Asuras, on the other side are the Devas. They are churning the ocean, and the churning stick is Mount Meru, and the rope is the serpent Vasuki. We do not have such a beautiful representation in any one of the Indian temples, but in the 11th century this was being done. What is the appeal of the Indian civilization, Hindu, Buddhist, Islamic, which I can say, in the propagation of Islam in Southeast Asia, the Gujarat merchants, the Coromandel coast, and the Kerala coast has contributed a lot, because it was easily ingratiating and assimilable for the local people, and the creative genius worked. And one of the concepts which was very appealing to the Southeast Asian rulers was the concept of the Devaraja. That is, the king, when he is coronated, becomes God on earth, and therefore his writ cannot be challenged by the people. So, in the case of a Shaivite king, the coronation is done and he is made into Shiva. In the case of a Vaishnavite king, he becomes Vishnu, and in the case of Buddhist kings, he becomes a Bodhisattva, so that his writ cannot be challenged. And they immortalize themselves and immortalize their favorite gods by constructing huge monuments. Thus, in the case of Cambodia, the Jayavarman II, who started the Khmer dynasty, was a Shaivite king. In the case of Suryavarman II, who constructed Angkor Wat, he was a Vaishnavite king, and Jayavarman VII was a Buddhist king, therefore he became. In Angkor Thom, you have huge statue of Buddha. From whichever direction you look at it, you feel as if the statue is looking at you. And Jayavarman VII had not only, he thought that his own image is being presented by the statue as such. Now, if you look at why is it that China did not make so much of cultural impact on Southeast Asian countries? Because the Chinese civilization, when the China historically is a cultural term, who followed the Chinese civilization belonged to China. So from Yangtze Valley, it started spreading slowly, and the elements of Chinese culture was introduced to them. They became Sinicized. China used to look at the people living outside China as barbarians. The barbarians were Sinicized, and Chinese culture was imposed. And the main characteristics were mandate from heaven, Chinese language and script, the institution of Mandarinate, and the Confucian values. Now, the mandate from heaven, unlike the Devaraja cult means the king becomes God and his writ cannot be challenged. Mandate from heaven is that there is only one heaven and the ruler has mandate to rule. And he has to rule in a virtuous manner. If he becomes a tyrant, the people have got the right to rebel and revolt against him. Such a philosophy of kingship naturally cannot appeal to the Southeast Asian rulers. And the only part of Southeast Asia which came under Chinese domination and was consequently Sinicized was northern part of Vietnam. For a period of 900 years, the northern part of Vietnam was under Chinese rule, but the Vietnamese were intense nationalists. And at every opportunity when the Chinese rule lessened, they revolted against them. In fact, the two great heroes of Vietnamese history are two women, Trung sisters, who mobilized the people against Chinese domination, threw them out. But the Chinese forces came back, subjugated them, and these two women, sisters, Trung sisters, they thought that they will be killed. So they jumped into the river and drowned themselves. And on the day that they drowned themselves, it's even today commemorated as a national holiday in Indonesia. In fact, Professor Kahin, who has done a monumental book on Indonesian nationalism and also has done books on Vietnam, he visited Hanoi in 1972. He was taken to a Catholic cathedral. And then when he came out, his host asked him, "Do you want to see some of our indigenous gods?" And then there were a number of temples dedicated to indigenous gods, of which many for their ancestors and many for the Trung sisters also. That is why China was not imitated, whereas the Indian civilization was imitated. This concept of study of the spread of Indian influences got a fillip during our national movement. Because during the national movement, we felt very happy, our historians felt very happy when they saw that India become great. The concept of greater India came into existence. The Hindu concept of Hindu colonies came, South Indian colonies, further India came in all. But unfortunately, today we have to reevaluate this concept of greater India. Because many of the Southeast Asians, they resent the fact if you tell them that you got it from India, because they have made it as their own. I recall a lecture in Chennai which was given by R. Venkatraman when he was the president. When he visited Thailand, he and his wife, the Thai king had arranged a ballet, and the ballet was based on Ramayana. During the interval, the Thai king turned to R. Venkatraman and asked him, "Do you have Ramayana in your country?" Then Venkatraman said, "I did not want to tell the Thai king that my own name is not one Rama but two Ramas, Ramaswamy Venkatraman, and my wife's name is Janaki," because I felt so happy that the Thais have made Ramayana as their own. In fact, in the version of Ramayana which is popular in Southeast Asia, there are variations from Valmiki. In Indonesia, we consider Hanuman to be a bachelor in India, but in Indonesia, Hanuman is a womanizer. Every woman that he comes across, he falls in love. Sita is considered to be the daughter of Ravana in many of these versions and all. So they have their variations, and the greatness of the Indian epic consists in the fact that it can be adapted, adopted, changed with the basic structure remaining in all. The Thai kings, incidentally, of the Chakri dynasty, at the time of coronation, they are deified, they are made into gods, and the title that they adopt is Rama. King Bhumipol, who was ruling until very recently, he was Rama the Ninth. Now I'll end up with one more point. Culture as an instrument of diplomacy, India unfortunately has not perfected it, and it offers a lot of scope for them. The diplomatic lethargy perhaps may be one of the reasons. I thought only the academics are lethargic, but listening to some of the diplomats here, I feel they also suffer from the ailment. In fact, I'll give you an illustration to prove what I'm saying. Prime Minister Narasimha Rao went to Thailand. Ambassador Ram was the A.N. Ram was the ambassador at that time, and both of them are Telugus, so the chemistry worked very well. And Narasimha Rao was going to speak in the Thammasat University. On the way, Ambassador Ram told Narasimha Rao, "It's the desire of every Buddhist in Thailand to come to India and visit the places associated with Lord Buddha. Where he was born, to go to Sarnath, where he set in motion the Buddhist principle, go to Gaya, where he attained nirvana and all. And Ram told Ambassador Prime Minister Narasimha Rao that if you mention that India will not charge any visa fee from Buddhists who want to come to India on pilgrimage, that will be a very noble gesture. And Narasimha Rao did that. Next day, the whole Thai media went gaga over it. We can all now go to India without paying visa fee. But do you know how many years it took for Government of India to implement it? 3 years. It took for Government of India to implement it with one important modification. Not all Thai Buddhists, only the Thai monks can come to India without fee. I submit that we should use culture as an instrument of diplomacy and encourage people. The Sinhalese in Sri Lanka, all of them would love to come to India. The Hindus, among diaspora Hindus, they would love to come to India and visit Buddhist places of pilgrimage. The Muslims would love to come to Nagaur. So all those who want to come to India on religious pilgrimage, if we exempt them from visa fee, that will be a nice gesture. May I stop here? I have some more points to mention. Constraints the time. It is not. Moreover, I should keep some points for the next seminar also. Thank you.